What happens when the woman they seat outside by the trash bins turns out to be married to a billionaire? Sarah Mitchell stared at the folding metal chair, positioned next to the restaurant's service entrance, the smell of kitchen exhaust hanging in the air, and made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her phone and texted her husband 5 simple words. Actually, would you mind coming? Before we go any further, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means a lot to us, and it helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Now, let's begin. 20 minutes earlier, Sarah had walked into the most humiliating moment, carefully designed just for her, and she'd walked into it with her eyes wide open. The birthday invitation had arrived on pale pink cardstock, embossed with gold lettering that screamed expensive taste and careful exclusion. Sarah held it between her fingers, feeling the weight of something more than paper. Her former college roommate Jessica was turning 35. And apparently everyone from their old circle would be there. Everyone except, Sarah suspected, anyone Jessica deemed beneath her current station. The invitation specified garden attire and a Michelin-starred restaurant in the hills, the kind of place where reservations required knowing someone who knew someone. Sarah's husband Michael glanced at it over breakfast and raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to go," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers with that particular intensity that still made her breath catch after 3 years of marriage. But Sarah had her reasons. Jessica didn't know who Michael was, didn't know anything about Sarah's life, beyond what little she'd shared on social media, which was essentially nothing. To Jessica and that whole crowd, Sarah was still the scholarship kid who'd worked 3 jobs through college, the one who wore thrift store clothes and brought Tupperware lunches while they brunched at bistros. What they didn't know, what Sarah had carefully kept private, was that Michael Mitchell wasn't just successful. He was Michael Mitchell, the 38-year-old founder of Horizon Technologies, a man whose net worth had recently crossed into 10-figure territory, whose face appeared on magazine covers, and whose opinions moved markets. They'd met at a literacy non-profit, where he volunteered and she coordinated programs, both using different names, both seeking something real beyond their everyday lives. By the time they'd fallen in love, wealth had become irrelevant. They'd married quietly, deliberately, and Sarah had chosen to keep working under her maiden name, living their life away from cameras and society pages. Michael supported her choice completely. He understood better than anyone what it meant to be seen only for your bank account. So when Sarah decided to attend Jessica's birthday, it wasn't about revenge. Not exactly. It was about bearing witness to who these people really were. About confirming what she'd always suspected about the toxicity she'd left behind. Michael kissed her forehead the afternoon of the party. "Call me if you need anything," he said. "Anything at all." The restaurant perched on a hillside, like a glass and steel jewel, its terrace overlooking the city below. Sarah arrived exactly on time, wearing a simple cream dress that cost more than she would have spent on clothes in an entire year of college, though you'd never know it from the understated elegance. She'd learned from Michael that real wealth whispered, while insecurity shouted. Jessica stood near the entrance in a confection of pale blue silk, her laugh too loud, her gestures too animated. She spotted Sarah and her expression flickered, surprise, and something less pleasant, crossing her perfectly made-up face. "Sarah, oh my God, you actually came!" The phrasing was already wrong, the emphasis on actually laden with barely concealed amazement that Sarah would dare show up. "Happy birthday, Jessica." Sarah handed her a gift. A first-edition book she'd tracked down, knowing Jessica collected them more for display than reading. Jessica's eyes widened appropriately at the wrapping from a boutique she'd recognize, but she set it aside quickly. Come in, everyone's out on the terrace." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a confidential whisper, but carried perfectly. "Listen, there's been a tiny mix-up with the seating. The main tables filled up faster than I expected, you know how it is. But we've set up a lovely spot for you." Sarah followed her through the restaurant's gleaming interior, past tables dressed in white linen, where their former classmates were already gathered, champagne flutes catching the late afternoon light. She recognized faces, people who'd once borrowed her notes and forgotten to return them, who'd left her out of study groups and spring break trips. They glanced up, some with recognition, others with the blank look of people who'd never really seen her in the first place. And then Jessica led her outside. Not to the main terrace, with its panoramic views and elegant tables, but to a small, folding table tucked beside the service entrance. A metal chair, the kind used for catering staff, sat alone. The smell of kitchen exhaust drifted from a nearby vent. "It's actually quite cozy," Jessica chirped, her voice bright with performative kindness. "And you'll have such a unique view of, well, everything. I'll make sure someone brings you a menu." Behind Jessica, 2 other women had followed them out. Brittany and Claire, both from their old sorority, both wearing expressions of poorly concealed amusement. "Oh wow," Brittany said, pressing her fingers to her lips in mock concern. "Is this where you're putting her?" "It's fine," Claire added quickly. Too quickly. "I mean, it's kinda like being backstage, right? Very insider." Their laughter floated away as they returned to the main terrace, leaving Sarah standing beside the folding table. Through the glass walls she could see the party continuing, people mingling and toasting. A celebration she'd been invited to but deliberately excluded from. A waiter appeared young and uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I'm sorry about this, I can bring you the tasting menu. And champagne?" "Thank you," Sarah said gently, giving him a genuine smile, because none of this was his fault. The tasting menu would be lovely. She sat down, the metal chair wobbling slightly on the uneven terrace stones. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. A text from Michael, "How's it going?" She took a photo of her view, the service door and exhaust vent artfully framed, and sent it with a simple caption, "Interesting seating arrangement." His response came immediately, "Say the word." But Sarah wasn't ready to leave yet. She wanted to see how far this would go, wanted to document for herself exactly who these people were when they thought no one important was watching. The meal arrived in courses, each plate exquisite, each delivered by increasingly apologetic staff, who clearly understood the cruelty of her placement. Sarah ate slowly, watching through the glass as Jessica held court, as champagne bottles emptied and replaced themselves, as the golden hour light painted everything beautiful, while hiding the ugliness underneath. Between courses, Jessica made a show of checking on her. "You doing okay out here? Not too cold? It was 75 degrees. Getting enough to eat? I know it's not quite the same as being with everyone else, but honestly, sometimes it's nice to have a little space, right? I remember you always liked being alone in college." The gaslighting was almost artistic in its precision. Each check-in attracted more onlookers, more former classmates who drifted over to peer through the glass at Sarah sitting alone beside the service entrance, like some kind of living art installation of exclusion. She heard the whispers, saw the smirks. "Is that Sarah Mitchell? Oh my god, I barely recognized her. Still shopping at thrift stores apparently. I heard she works at some non-profit." How noble. Jessica said she couldn't fit her at the main tables. Apparently she was a last-minute RSVP. That last bit was a lie. Sarah had responded within a week of receiving the invitation. But truth was irrelevant when you were rewriting someone's story to justify your cruelty. The sun began setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The party crescendoed toward cake and speeches. Sarah's phone buzzed again. "Michael. Still want me to stay away?" She thought about it. Thought about standing up, walking out, taking the high road that everyone always preached about. But something in her resisted. These people had spent years making her feel small, making her question her worth, teaching her that kindness was weakness and poverty was failure. They'd learnt nothing, grown not at all, and would continue this pattern with the next person they deemed unworthy unless someone held up a mirror. Sarah texted back, "Actually, would you mind joining me for dessert?" His response was a single word, "Address." She sent it, then added, "Fair warning, I'm seated outside by the kitchen. It's quite the power move." "Perfect. See you in 20 minutes. Sarah ordered coffee, and waited, watching the party reach its peak. Jessica stood to give a speech about friendship and gratitude. About the journey from college to now. About surrounding yourself with people who lift you up. The irony was apparently lost on everyone present. Inside, someone proposed a toast to Jessica's generosity and kind heart. Outside, Sarah sipped her coffee and checked the time. 19 minutes after her text, a slight commotion rippled through the restaurant's interior. Sarah watched heads turn toward the entrance, watched conversations pause mid-sentence, watched Jessica's face transform from confusion to shock to something approaching panic. Michael Mitchell walked through the dining room with the quiet confidence of someone who'd never needed to announce his presence. He wore dark slacks and a crisp white shirt, no tie, the kind of understated elegance that money couldn't buy but could certainly facilitate. Behind him, because Michael never went anywhere without them, though they usually stayed invisible, were two members of his security team. The restaurant's owner materialized from somewhere, face flushed, hands gesturing apologetically, clearly recognizing one of the city's most prominent entrepreneurs now walking through his establishment. Michael ignored him politely, his eyes scanning the terrace until they found Sarah through the glass. His expression softened, a private smile just for her, before he stepped outside. "Sorry I'm late," he said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. Traffic was terrible. He pulled out his phone, frowned at the wobbly metal chair, then turned back toward the interior, where a frozen tableau of partygoers stared open-mouthed. "Excuse me," he called to a waiter, "could we get a proper chair out here? This one seems unstable." 3 waiters scrambled to respond, nearly colliding with each other in their haste. Within seconds, an upholstered dining chair appeared, followed immediately by a second. A manager materialized with a linen tablecloth, transforming the folding table while apologizing profusely for the misunderstanding about seating arrangements. "Mr. Mitchell, if you and your wife would prefer to move inside," the manager began. Michael glanced at Sarah, eyebrow raised in question. She shook her head slightly. "We're comfortable here," he said easily, "though we will have dessert. Whatever the chef recommends." Inside, chaos had erupted in slow motion. People were whispering urgently. Phones were emerging from purses. Someone was clearly Googling because their face had gone pale while scrolling. Jessica stood frozen near her cake, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Brittany and Claire had grabbed each other's arms, their earlier smugness evaporating into dawning horror. Sarah, one of them breathed, loud enough to carry. "Sarah Mitchell. Oh my God, she's married to Michael Mitchell." The whispers spread like wildfire. "Michael Mitchell, Horizon Technologies, Forbes 400, that Michael Mitchell." And they'd seated his wife outside next to the garbage bins and exhaust vents. They'd mocked her clothes, her career, her worth. They'd performed cruelty as entertainment, while she sat alone eating a $500 tasting menu beside a service entrance. Michael seemed oblivious to the commotion, his attention focused on Sarah. "How was dinner?" "Excellent," she said truthfully. "The seared scallops were perfect." "How was your meeting?" "Productive. Closed the acquisition we've been working on." He said it the way someone else might mention picking up groceries, then reached across the table to take her hand. "I missed you though. These things are always better when you're there." Through the glass, Jessica was moving toward them, her face a mask of forced composure over rising panic. She pushed through the terrace door, her smile stretching too wide, her hands fluttering uncertainly. "Michael, I mean Mr. Mitchell. Oh my God, I had no idea. Sarah never said. I mean, we would have, of course, if I'd known," Jessica stammered. "Known what?" Michael's voice was polite, curious, giving her absolutely no assistance. Jessica's eyes darted between them, calculations visible behind her expression. "That Sarah was, I mean that you two were married. She never posts anything. We all thought she was still, we didn't realize. That my wife deserved a seat at the actual party she was invited to." Michael's tone remained pleasant, almost friendly, which somehow made the words cut deeper. "That seems like it should be standard practice regardless of who someone's married to, don't you think?" "Of course. Absolutely. It was just a mix-up. The tables filled so fast and I thought Sarah would appreciate the privacy. Being more introverted and all." Jessica fumbled. "Is that what this was?" Michael glanced around at the service entrance, the exhaust vent, the view of nothing. "Privacy." Sarah watched Jessica flounder, watched the lies collapse under the weight of their own absurdity. Other guests had gathered near the glass, pretending not to eavesdrop while hanging on every word. The restaurant owner hovered nearby, clearly terrified that one of the city's most influential businessmen had discovered his establishment being used as a venue for social humiliation. "Mr. Mitchell," he interjected desperately, "please, let me move you to our private dining room, complimentary of course, anything you need." "We're fine," Michael said again, then looked at Sarah. "Unless you want to move." She could feel the weight of every eye on them, could hear the frantic whispering, could sense the social calculus being frantically recalculated inside. Every person who'd ignored her, mocked her, treated her as less than, was now realizing exactly how catastrophically they'd miscalculated. And Sarah realized something important. She didn't need them to suffer. She didn't need revenge or vindication or public humiliation thrown back in their faces. What she needed was to go home with her husband, to the life they'd built together that had nothing to do with these people or their twisted values. Actually, Sarah said, standing and collecting her clutch, I think we'll head out. It's getting late. Jessica's relief was visible and pathetic. Oh, of course. Let me get your gift, I'll walk you out. Keep it, Sarah said. Happy birthday, Jessica. I hope you got exactly the celebration you deserved. The ambiguity of the statement hung in the air as Sarah took Michael's offered arm. They walked through the restaurant, through the sea of stunned faces and dropped conversations, through the door and into the evening air. Michael's car waited at the curb, sleek and understated. His driver opened the door and they slid into the quiet interior, the restaurant's chaos fading behind them. They drove in silence for several minutes, the city lights beginning to glow against the deepening sky. Finally, Michael spoke. You okay? Yeah, Sarah said, and meant it. I think I am. Want to tell me what that was really about? She considered the question, turning it over in her mind. I needed to see it, she said finally. Not imagine it, not assume it, but actually witness who they were. Because part of me kept thinking maybe I'd been too sensitive in college, maybe I'd misread things, maybe they'd grown. And they're exactly who I thought they were. Which means I was right to leave that world behind. Right to build something different. Michael squeezed her hand. For what it's worth, I think you handled that with remarkable grace. I was ready to buy the restaurant and fire everyone. I know you were, Sarah said, smiling despite herself. That's why I love you. Not because you could, but because you'd want to defend me even when I don't need defending. You never need defending, Michael agreed. But I'll always want to anyway. They drove home through the city, past the gleaming towers and designer boutiques, past the restaurants where people performed their worth through price tags and postal codes. Sarah thought about Jessica's party, about the careful cruelty of that folding table, about the whispers and sideways glances. She thought about how many years she'd carried the weight of their judgment, how much energy she'd spent questioning whether she belonged anywhere. And then she thought about Michael, about their quiet mornings and shared work at the non-profit, about the life they'd chosen that valued character over capital, substance over status. She thought about going home to their house filled with books and art they actually cared about, to their rescue dogs and the garden they tended together, to the Monday night tradition of cooking dinner and watching old movies. That was wealth, the real kind, the kind that couldn't be measured or displayed or seated at the best table. Her phone buzzed with incoming messages. Probably Jessica, probably others from the party, probably apologies and explanations, and desperate attempts to salvage connections they'd spent all evening destroying. Sarah silenced her phone without looking. Some bridges were meant to burn. Some doors were meant to close. Some chapters ended not with confrontation, but with the simple act of walking away. Hungry? Michael asked as they pulled into their driveway. We never got dessert. Starving, Sarah admitted. I think there's ice cream in the freezer. Perfect. He came around to open her door, offered his hand, walked with her up the path, lined with the roses they'd planted last spring. Inside, their home waited, warm and welcoming, and entirely theirs. Sarah kicked off her shoes, changed into comfortable clothes, met Michael in the kitchen, where he was already scooping ice cream into bowls. They ate standing at the counter like they always did, talking about everything except the party, making plans for the weekend, laughing at something stupid one of the dogs had done that morning. Later, much later, lying in bed with Michael asleep beside her, Sarah thought about the girl she'd been in college, the one who'd tried so hard to fit in, to be accepted, to prove she deserved to take up space in rooms full of people who'd never had to justify their presence anywhere. She thought about how that girl had grown into a woman who knew her worth wasn't determined by where anyone else seated her, who'd built a life of meaning and connection, who'd found love that had nothing to do with transactions or status. And she thought about Jessica, and Brittany, and Claire, and all the others, still performing their worth for each other, still measuring their value in invitations and exclusions, still playing games that had no winners. She didn't hate them, she didn't need to. Hate required caring, and Sarah had finally, completely, stopped caring what they thought. That was the real freedom. Not the money or the power, or the dramatic moment when Michael had walked in and their cruelty had been exposed. The freedom was in knowing she'd never needed their validation in the first place, that she'd been enough all along, that the girl sitting alone outside the party had possessed more grace and strength than everyone inside combined. Sarah closed her eyes, Michael's breathing steady beside her, and felt something release that she hadn't even known she'd been holding. Tomorrow she'd block Jessica's number. She'd delete the messages she hadn't read. She'd continue building her life with intention and integrity, surrounded by people who saw her clearly and loved her truly. Tonight she'd sleep peacefully, knowing she'd closed a door on a past that had never served her, that she'd walked away from a party she'd never wanted to attend in the first place. And, when she dreamed, it wasn't of revenge or vindication, or watching her former friends scramble to apologize. She dreamed of the garden in spring, of roses blooming, of Michael laughing, of a life measured not in gold-embossed invitations, but in moments of genuine connection and quiet joy. She dreamed of home, the real kind, the kind you build yourself,